There comes a time in every Garo fan's life where they have to make the tough choice. Once you've finished all the Kouga content from the series, where do you go from there? Do you stay in release order and watch Garo, the one who shines in the darkness, the third live-action series that starts the Raiga universe continuity, with a fresh story and universe but pulls in some of the lore of the first series? Or skip on to Makai no Hana, the fourth TV series that features the Kouga bloodline with his son Raiga? It's a weird decision that has a cascading effect on how you experience the rest of the series. Not to mention the Garo side stories that feature Jabi and Rika, or the Zero movies that came out right before Makai no Hana. From here, the Ryuga universe and the Kouga timeline start to just swap movies back and forth. So it starts to become kinda hard to focus. I, however, chose Makai no Hana, if you didn't read the title, also known as Garo The Makai Flower. Makai no Hana features Raiga, the son of Kouga and Karu. When Raiga was 6 years old, his mother was sucked into a vortex, or something, I guess. It doesn't really talk about it all that much. And Kouga tells his son he's going to find his mother, leaving him with Gonza, the butler who's stolen the heart of 3 generations. There's a stone tablet that's been sealing away Eris, a great evil, and someone close to the Makai Knights has broken the seal and allowed the great evil to return. To seal the evil, Raiga is given a mystic tool. That's all good and well, but the mystic tool is not a tool at all. It's a girl named Mayuri, who was imbued with a magical power to seal things away when her mother was attacked by a horror while pregnant. Everyone treats Mayuri as an object, with the exception of the kind-hearted Raiga, who refuses to look at her as anything but human. In the quest to seal Eris, Raiga finds himself overwhelmed and is given assistance to a phantom knight named Crow, as well as a series of new and old characters all stepping in to help, from the lovable butler Gonza to fan favorite Zero, and yeah, even Zebra Man. Raiga is a very different protagonist from Kouga, and honestly, I was completely ready to embrace and love that. Kouga is known for his scowl and quiet disposition, where Raiga has one of the goofiest smiles I've ever seen. He laughs and jokes and seems to be blissfully enjoying being a Makai Knight, where Kouga was the gruff stand-in knight who exemplified duty. I thought this was a really fun change and I was excited to see what they did with it, but it's kinda disappointing. He's a fine character and he's punctuated by his kindness. He cares a lot about people, where Kouga felt like he only cared about defeating horrors. But the thing with Kouga was he was a gruff knight, and yes, I didn't think he really went on that big of a journey as a character. But by the end of the first season and the entirety of the Kouga saga, he still had a lot of growth. He was angry, cold, and unwelcoming. But by the end of the first season, you had really felt him open up a bit to Karu, and that really helped you care and softened him up a little bit. However, Raiga starts off as more open than Kouga ever grew to be, but it never felt like that went anywhere or gave him any major motivations. Outside of him maybe being happy with how things turn out with Mayuri, Raiga pretty much ends the season the same way he started. You're given information about his character, but you don't really get to see his character grow. Overall, there are really only a handful of really defining character moments through the entire season. And it's a shame because he's not a bad character, he's just not that interesting through the long term. He gets upset once or twice, but it's nothing when you compare him to like the steel-faced Kouga. And I was really into the idea of a new protagonist who loved everybody and just wanted to be a kind knight. I just wish they gave him more in the way of conflict. He wants the world to see Mayuri as more than an object. And that's okay. I guess that's a motivation, but he can't really do anything with that more than just lead by example. And I think he does that and he does it well enough, but that's a pretty underwhelming character story. And it's weird because I really like Raiga. I think his kind charm translates really well. I want good things for him and I want to continue watching the character. But overall, he needs more. Just a little bit of something, some kind of meat on the bone that you can sink your teeth into. Mayuri, on the other hand, is completely emotionless. It's kind of like a switched up role of Karu and Kouga. She's really the only character that by the end of the show you can see any notable growth. She's learning to be more human, learning to see the light in the world and not just see herself as a tool. She can be a person with emotions because she's just human. She learns to stop and smell the soup and see the beauty in the world. But really, that part of the story feels kinda half-baked itself. There's no reason that she's emotionless, it just kinda shows you there were jerk priests who treated her like a tool because they didn't want her to feel more human or feel her humanity slip away. It's just a really thin explanation that feels hollow. And in the end, she really doesn't end the season that differently than when we found her. She does have the most notable growth, but at the same time, she used to have no emotion and hey, now she can give a small smirk or get really upset when her friends are in danger. It is something, and it's more than I felt like we got with Raiga. And I guess I like her too. Raiga and Mayuri have really good chemistry together. And I like how opposite they are, at least for the most part. And she doesn't need protecting, so she's still a huge step up from the always in distress Karu. I wouldn't really change her character because I think she does well in this story. I just wish she was used as more of a mechanic for the rest of the cast to react to. Really, the only character I think has a strong reaction to her is Gonza. And yes, I am absolutely thrilled to see Gonza back in this story. And I think he has more of a role to play here than the rest of the Garo series. Gonza's the butler who served the Saejima family for 3 generations. He's kind of the representation of what a Makai Knight family can be in this story. He treats Mayuri as a person and goes out of his way to take care of her, and makes it his personal mission to make sure she's happy and feels welcomed and part of a family. In one episode, Gonza goes out of his way to make soup for Mayuri and goes as far as having a retired Makai priestess enchant the soup bowl that has a little calligraphy creature swim around, just because Mayuri showed a small bit of interest in an animated painting earlier in the episode. He's endearing and he reaches out to almost every character who enters the mansion. He has so much more screen time here, and he helps people figure out moral conundrums and makes great observations. And he stars in his own found footage episode that operates as a clip show or the recap show of the season. Crow is a newcomer to the show and a new focus on the world of Garo, and introduces us to the Phantom Knights. Knights who are a covert group who act independently without a specific jurisdiction. Crow is just a title and his real name is actually unknown. He's an okay character and he's a completely different character when compared to Raiga, and seems a lot more like Kouga in his standard demeanor. They kinda shape him into a similar role as Zero, but it never really feels like a rivalry. Crow always just seems like he's pumped to hang out with the Golden Knight Garo. The show does do a lot of work to try to make him interesting, but there really just wasn't anything that grabbed a hold of me with this character. He doesn't have a family and his loyalties are tested, but never in a way or for long enough that makes you think like this character is going to change or flip or he's really going to do anything of consequence. I like how this character is portrayed, but it felt like he needed more to do in the story. He's a Phantom Knight and he kinda operates as Raiga's shadow. When he was first introduced, I just thought he would work really well as this opposing way to go about business that would conflict with the way that Raiga has been operating. Maybe put into question his kind knight and his kind of sunny disposition in what amounts to a really dark world. He just needed some bigger conflict with Raiga to make their teamwork feel more cohesive and that they're building each other up in an opposite kind of way. The story of Makai no Hana is lacking. I feel like a broken record saying this, but I felt the same way with this series as I did with the other Garo series. The first half of the series is just deeply episodic. It leads up to a clip show and then it starts to focus on the actual story of the season. And I shouldn't be surprised. This is the 3rd TV series of Garo I've watched, and it's done the same thing every single time. Hey, 2 times is a coincidence, 3 times a pattern. And I would say out of all of them, this series suffers the most, because something about Garo Makai Senki is the early part of the season when it was really episodic, I found the writing and the stories themselves really good. And I don't want to underplay Makai no Hana, there are some seriously fun episodes. Like episode 4, Film, where an old projectionist of the Showa theater learns that the theater is going to shut down and becomes possessed by a horror. His boss is a jerk and he has the power to trap him inside of some of his favorite movies. And his favorite movies just happen to be American horror movies at the Showa theater. It starts out with an homage to Night of the Living Dead in black and white. Eventually an otaku gets thrown in there and he's having the time of his life. Then Raiga shows up to ruin the fun, but also finds himself in the movie. But then the movie starts changing and it goes from the first zombie movie to the one that changed zombie movies forever with 28 Days Later. It's an homage that uses a lot of depth of field and some of the best looking shots in the entire series. And it's just fun to see Raiga like cutting down zombies. Then it transitions to a Scream parody where Raiga's making some Jiffy Pop. And then the phone rings, and just like in Scream, it starts to reference Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. Then when it flips over to the Silence of the Lambs parody, the horror busts out Freddy Claus and a Jason chainsaw. This is really the perfect Halloween episode. The whole time the horror's narrating about what makes each movie important and so iconic. So if you don't watch anything else from this series, literally just watch this episode. I loved it. Likewise is episode 11 called Manga, where a manga artist who is past his prime becomes possessed by a horror, who allows him to turn people into manga panels. It's super fun, and it makes fun of manga artists, and the industry as a whole. Definitely worth watching just for a good laugh. Then, there's the downright weird with episode 5, Star Chart, featuring an American, or at least someone who speaks in an American English accent.
Yeah?
But it's not.
Oh, wait a minute. I could have sworn it's a Virgo, a Leo. Are you a Leo? Maybe a Sagittarius. Oh, wait a minute. It's okay.
Who's murdering women and talking crazy about stars and the star charts. I probably just find it funny because it's half in English, and a lot of the characters just don't fully understand what he's saying they don't understand spoken English all that well. Everything about this episode is just really odd in a way that I had a lot of fun with. Overall, the episodic episodes are mostly a lot of fun, but compared to Makai Senki, it never has those moments for me that go a little deeper, like Abyss or Letter, where I had really deep moments with the episodes that featured horrors that felt scarily human. All the episodic episodes have a levity to them that never hits that like artistic charm that I really liked in the last series I watched. Probably the closest it comes is episode 9, Raising. It's more introspective, featuring a college kid who finds a naked passed out horror and takes her to his natural science club room, where she starts eating fish out of the tanks and starts shedding her skin, and it just gets really weird. It has a twist ending, and it's probably one of the best early episodes from a writing point of view. The episode as a whole kind of makes me uncomfortable, but I think it really worked because it kept me guessing the entire episode. There are probably more untransformed fight scenes in Makai no Hana than the rest of the Garo TV series. I'm not complaining. One of my favorite things about Garo is the amount of untransformed fights and the really fun wire work they do. I think that makes some of the best Garo scenes. However, this is also the cheapest Garo's ever felt, and I'm not dying for more computer-aided fights, but I did note there was a lack of them comparatively, and I think this kind of worked for its benefit. You just get so much more in the way of untransformed knight on monster action. Enough that when it does use a heavily CGI scene, you're kinda caught off guard. It's weird because there's just so many times in Makai no Hana where there's a monster in an untransformed knight, and then the only time you see them in the knight outfit is for one quick slice. One final blow. And I think this works for the fiction of the Garo universe, where they're not supposed to be able to stay in the knight outfits for all that long. So sometimes they just swing their sword and transform into the knight and kill the monster. A lot of the times without the spectacle of the transformation sequence. I personally like this kind of action, and I really love seeing the physical Garo suit be used a lot more. Where I would say most of the suit fights in Garo before this were about 70% CGI, and now that's really reduced down to maybe 10%. I do, however, think it makes the production feel a little cheaper just because you can see it being used as a cost-cutting effort. But I also think this brings back some of the charm that I feel gets lost in the CGI fights. At this point, the world of the Makai Knights has a really deep lore, but in Makai no Hana, they don't really capitalize on that at all. I don't really need a reintroduction to what the Makai priests are or anything like that, but by the time they show up in the series, it's so late that it almost feels out of place. I'd say this series more than any other focuses on the characters, opposed to the world of the Makai Knights. And that's not bad, but the characters are so flat that the world could do with a little bit more pumping up to make them more interesting. You get a few other knights in here, but for the most part, Makai no Hana just feels really small. Smaller fights, a smaller cast, and smaller world building. You do get Zero in one episode, taking out child Raiga for his first hunt. It's a really cool episode that has Kid Raiga fighting Zero, and he's holding his own. Through the episode, you get to see Raiga get excited to go on the hunt, but gets distracted when he passes the window of a toy store, showing Raiga straddling that line between childlike innocence and the deep horrors of the world. With the show asking the question, is it okay to rip that innocence from Raiga just because of his bloodline? After the hunt, Zero asks Raiga what he wants, showing a landscape of people out for the night with their families. Kids getting ice cream versus where Zero is going, down a dark path, away from innocence and happiness. I really think this show just needed more moments like this. Moments that emphasize what you lose as a Makai Knight, what the Order takes away from you. More doubt, just more something. The rest of the Garo series really did a good job of making the Makai world feel huge and lived in. And since this series makes everything feel so much smaller, I just wish they really leaned into this kind of storytelling and moved more in this direction, letting the narrative emphasize how small you can feel in a bigger world. For me, so far in the Garo series, Makai no Hana is the hardest Garo series to recommend. Watching Lament of the Dark Dragon and Kouga Saga, it was so easy to just say, hey, go watch that. Even if you don't know Garo, you'd be fine. Makai no Hana is fine. I didn't dislike my time with it, but it just feels so thin. There were so many times, and especially in the early season, I had to ask myself, if I was trying to watch this weekly, would I keep coming back? And I'm sad to say that I think that answer is no. I know it's a Garo problem as a whole, but that early part of the season just has such a pacing problem that I really struggle to recommend getting into it. When I did my first Garo review 5 years ago, I said maybe just watch the recap episode and skip the early part. Since time has gone on, I've honestly kind of felt guilty for saying that, because it misses things, it does. You miss out on these little bits of character development, but watching this series reminded me that I might have been right. I never felt that way about Makai Senki because it always gave me just enough to keep watching, just enough of the main story to keep me developed in these characters. But Garo the Makai Flower does not do that for me. It's kind of a hard watch. It just needed more story episodes sprinkled in between the anthology horror episodes. When it gets to the through plot of an episode, I kind of really like it, but the little character bits you get through those first 13 episodes are not enough. It just feels so thin. There's just no meat on the bone and nothing to bite into. If I was just casually watching this and not just doing some stupid review, I don't think I'd ever make it to that recap episode where the show actually tells me a story. And even then, it's not the most amazing story. It's fine, and I outright like what the story is. And I like these characters enough that I'm ready to spend more time with them in the future, but the slog of the early season just doesn't feel worth it. It makes me really sad to say that, and even sadder that this is where I'm going to leave the Garo series this year. But that's my honest opinion of this series. It's the lowest ranking season of Garo that I've seen. It's really disappointing, especially after watching Makai Senki, a series that really defined and made concrete that I really love the Garo series. I think about that series all the time, how much I cared about some of those more episodic episodes, and how much I loved the pace of that story and those characters. I was disappointed by the first season of Garo for a lot of the same reasons that I'm disappointed in this one. I really thought that Makai Senki showed me that the Garo series learned lessons and was going to go in a different direction. This doesn't make me hate the Garo series or anything silly like that. It's still one of my favorite series to talk about every October, and the season doesn't feel complete without watching it. There really wasn't a time I wasn't happy watching Makai no Hana. It just drug on at times and it could start to feel like a chore. And I just really wish it didn't, because there's things here that with a couple of small tweaks, I think it would have made it a completely different experience. I was so ready for a new story with a new protagonist, excited to get reintroduced to the Makai world with new eyes. A few small changes would have made this one of the best Garo series, but I think what we got is a C-tier show. It's not horrible, it's not even bad, it's just so vanilla that it became a little boring. And I just wish this isn't where I'm leaving off this year with the Garo series. I'm High C, and I hope you keep watching next year.